Imagine a world where simply reading a book could cost you your life. A world where kings and popes feared words on paper more than enemy armies. Such a world existed in medieval Europe. Forbidden books changed the course of history, destroyed empires, and created new civilizations. From the Malleus Maleficarum to the works of Galileo, from the writings of Machiavelli to the pamphlets of the French revolutionaries, every banned page was a blow to the foundations of the old world. Today, we will tell you about the books that changed humanity, despite the fires of the Inquisition and royal decrees. How forbidden knowledge became the foundation of our freedom. If you enjoyed this story about the forbidden books that changed the world, be sure to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Now, here's a question for discussion in the comments. Do you think there are books today that are so dangerous to those in power that they are trying to ban them? Write in the comments what modern examples of censorship you have encountered. Your opinion is very important to us. In medieval Europe, there was a weapon more terrifying than any sword: the book. While knights fought on the battlefields, authors of banned treatises waged war against the very foundations of feudal society. Their words could overthrow kings, destroy the power of the church, and change the course of history across entire continents. Imagine a world where simply owning a certain book was punishable by death, where inquisitors searched homes for seditious texts with the same ferocity with which they hunted witches, where kings spent fortunes to destroy every copy of a dangerous work. This is not fantasy. It is the reality of medieval and Renaissance Europe. Those in power understood that ideas have destructive power. One book could sow doubts about the legitimacy of the monarchy. Another could undermine the authority of the church, and a third could give the people knowledge that would make them ungovernable. Therefore, a real war was waged against dangerous books. The church created the Index of Prohibited Books, a list of literature whose reading was punishable by excommunication and death. Kings issued decrees ordering the burning of seditious texts in public squares. The Inquisition persecuted not only authors, but also copyists, booksellers, and ordinary readers. But what made these books so dangerous? Why did words on paper inspire such fear in powerful rulers? The answer lies in the nature of power in medieval society. The feudal system was based on three pillars: the divine right of kings, the infallibility of the church, and the ignorance of the people. Forbidden books attacked each of these pillars. They proved that kings were ordinary people, prone to mistakes and vices. They exposed the corruption of the church hierarchy and questioned religious dogma. They brought knowledge to the people that had previously been available only to the select few. The authors of these books knew what they were getting into. Many of them ended their lives at the stake or in exile. But they continued to write because they believed that truth is stronger than any power, and knowledge is a weapon that cannot be taken away. The history of banned books is the history of the struggle of the human mind against tyranny. It is a story of how words changed the world, destroying old orders and creating new ones. Every banned page was a blow to the foundations of medieval society. Today, we take freedom of speech for granted. But once upon a time, people paid with their lives for the right to write and read certain books. These texts shaped the modern world we live in. Their ideas became the foundation of democracy, human rights, and scientific progress. Let's take a look into the dark basements of history and learn about the books that changed the course of human civilization, about texts that kings feared more than enemy armies, about forbidden knowledge that ultimately made us free. Among all the banned books of the Middle Ages, one stands out as particularly sinister: Malleus Maleficarum, or The Hammer of Witches. Written in 1486 by Dominican monks Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, this book became a guide to the destruction of women throughout Europe. But the paradox is that the Malleus Maleficarum was itself banned at first. Church authorities rejected it as too extreme even for the Inquisition. The University of Cologne condemned the book, and Pope Alexander VI prohibited its distribution. However, the invention of the printing press made it impossible to completely control the text. The book was secretly printed and distributed throughout Europe, despite the official ban. By the 16th century, it had become so popular among witch hunters that the Church was forced to lift the ban in order to regain control of the situation. The Malleus Maleficarum was a detailed guide to identifying, interrogating, and executing suspected witches. The authors claimed that women were naturally more prone to witchcraft because of their weakness of spirit and lustfulness. The book contained detailed instructions on torture to force the accused to confess. The chapters on the trial process were particularly dangerous. Kramer and Sprenger effectively reversed the principle of presumption of innocence. According to their logic, denying accusations of witchcraft was in itself proof of guilt. Admitting guilt meant death, but refusing to confess also led to execution. The book created a vicious circle of terror. Any woman could be accused of witchcraft on the basis of the most absurd evidence: unusual behavior, knowledge of herbs, beauty, or, conversely, ugliness. Even good relations with neighbors could be interpreted as the result of magical influence. The Hammer of Witches legitimized mass murder. According to historians, between 20,000 and 60,000 people, mostly women, were executed for witchcraft between the 15th and 17th centuries. The book became the theoretical justification for this genocide. Paradoxically, many secular rulers were initially skeptical of witch hunts. They understood that mass executions undermined the economy and created social instability. However, pressure from the Church and the popularity of the Malleus Maleficarum forced them to join the persecution. The book was especially popular in the Holy Roman Empire, where decentralized power allowed local inquisitors to act almost without control. Entire regions turned into zones of terror, where any accusation of witchcraft meant a death sentence. Interestingly, the Hammer of Witches also had an economic component. The property of executed witches was confiscated by the Church and the state. This created a vicious incentive to continue the persecution, especially against wealthy women. The scientific revolution of the 17th century gradually undermined the authority of the Hammer of Witches. The development of rational thinking and empirical methods of investigation made belief in witchcraft less convincing. The last mass trials of witches took place in the early 18th century. Today, the Malleus Maleficarum is studied as an example of how a book can become an instrument of mass terror. This text reminds us of the dangers of fanaticism and the importance of critical thinking. History shows that even a banned book can have destructive power. In 1324, a book was published that shook the foundations of the medieval world. Defensor Pacis, or Defender of the Peace, by the Italian philosopher Marsilius of Padua, became one of the most radical political treatises of its time. This book challenged the very idea of papal authority and proposed a revolutionary concept of state structure. Marsilius of Padua was no ordinary scholastic philosopher. He studied medicine at the University of Paris, which gave him a scientific approach to the analysis of social phenomena. His co-author was Jean de Gendino, a well-known Averroist, who brought elements of Aristotelian philosophy to the work. The Defender of the World appeared at the height of the conflict between Pope John XXII and the Holy Roman Emperor Louis the Bavarian. Marsilius served at the emperor's court and saw how papal power interfered in the affairs of secular rulers. This inspired him to create a theoretical justification for the independence of the state from the Church. The main idea of the book was revolutionary for its time. Marsilius argued that power in the state should belong to the people, not to the Pope or the Emperor. He proposed a concept of popular sovereignty that was several centuries ahead of its time. According to his theory, rulers derive their power from the people and are accountable to them. The chapters criticizing papal power were particularly dangerous for the Church. Marsilius argued that the Church had no right to interfere in worldly affairs. He claimed that the clergy should be concerned exclusively with the salvation of souls, and that all matters of state administration were the responsibility of secular authorities. The author developed a detailed concept of the separation of powers. He proposed the creation of a representative body that would express the will of the people and control the actions of rulers. This idea became the precursor of modern parliamentarism and constitutional monarchy. The Defender of the World also contained revolutionary ideas about the nature of law. Marsilius argued that laws should be created by representatives of the people, not imposed from above. He distinguished between human laws, which can be changed, and divine commandments, which are immutable. This division undermined the foundations of theocratic rule. The book quickly attracted the attention of the church authorities. Pope John XXII immediately condemned the Defender of the World as a heretical work. In 1327, the bull Licet Juxta Doctrinam was issued, declaring the book monstrous and heretical. Marsilius was excommunicated from the church, and his work was added to the list of banned books. Persecution forced Marsilius to flee to the court of Louis the Bavarian in Munich. There he continued to develop his ideas and participated in anti-papal propaganda. The emperor used Marsilius's theories to justify his independence from Rome. Despite the ban, the Defender of the World was secretly distributed throughout Europe. Manuscripts were copied and passed from hand to hand. Marsilius's ideas influenced the development of political thought during the Renaissance and Reformation. In the 14th and 15th centuries, the book inspired various anti-clerical movements. Its ideas were used by the Hussites in Bohemia, the Lollards in England, and supporters of the conciliar movement. All of them found in Marcellus's treatise a theoretical justification for their struggle against papal authority. The influence of the Defender of the World spread far beyond the Middle Ages. The ideas of popular sovereignty and the separation of powers, first systematically set out by Marsilius, became the basis of political philosophy in the modern era. John Locke, Charles Montesquieu, and other thinkers of the Enlightenment developed the concepts laid out in this banned 14th century book. In the 14th century, English theologian John Wycliffe wrote works that anticipated the Reformation by a century and a half. His writings became so dangerous to the church authorities that even 40 years after the author's death, his remains were exhumed and burned, and his ashes were scattered to the wind. Wycliffe's books laid the ideological foundation for revolutionary changes in the Christian world. John Wycliffe was an outstanding scholar at Oxford University, a doctor of theology, and one of the most influential thinkers of his time. His academic reputation made his criticism of the Church particularly dangerous. When such an authoritative theologian questioned the foundations of papal power, it could not go unnoticed. Wycliffe's main work, De Domino, On the Dominion, revolutionized the understanding of power in Christian society. He argued that all power comes from God and can be taken away from those who are in a state of mortal sin. This meant that corrupt church hierarchies had no right to their authority. Wycliffe's ideas about church property were particularly dangerous. He argued that the true church should be poor, like the apostles. He considered the accumulation of wealth by the clergy to be a departure from Christian principles. These ideas threatened the economic foundations of church power. In his treatise On Papal Power, Wycliffe went even further. He questioned the very institution of the papacy, arguing that Christ did not appoint Peter as head of the church. According to the English theologian, every Christian has a direct connection with God and does not need the mediation of the Pope. Wycliffe's ideas about Holy Scripture were revolutionary. He claimed that the Bible was the only source of Christian teaching and that church tradition was secondary. Moreover, he insisted that every Christian should have access to Scripture in their native language. This is why Wycliffe initiated the translation of the Bible into English. It was a revolutionary idea, as the Church strictly controlled access to sacred texts. The Latin Vulgate was available only to the educated clergy, which supported their monopoly on the interpretation of faith. Wycliffe's English Bible was the first complete translation of the Holy Scriptures into the vernacular in Western Europe. Manuscripts of this translation were secretly distributed throughout England, despite severe prohibitions. Possession of such a Bible was punishable by death. Wycliffe's ideas about predestination were also heretical from the point of view of the official church. He claimed that salvation depended solely on divine grace, not on good deeds or church sacraments. This undermined the importance of the priesthood and the church hierarchy. The doctrine of the Eucharist became another source of conflict. Wycliffe denied transubstantiation, the dogma that bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. He believed that the Eucharist had symbolic meaning, which contradicted the official doctrine of the Church. Wycliffe's followers, known as Lollards, continued to spread his ideas after his death. They preached in English, criticized the wealth of the clergy, and called for church reforms. The Lollard movement became a precursor to the English Reformation. Wycliffe's influence spread far beyond England. His writings reached Bohemia, where they inspired Jan Hus to fight for church reform. The Hussite movement in Bohemia was a direct continuation of the ideas of the English reformer. The Council of Constance in 1417 posthumously condemned Wycliffe as a heretic. His books were burned, and his name was anathematized. However, the ideas set forth in his banned works lived on, and ultimately prevailed. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century brought to life many of the principles for which Wycliffe had fought. In 1511, a book was published in Paris that became one of the most witty and destructive critiques of medieval society. Erasmus of Rotterdam's Praise of Folly was a satirical masterpiece that, under the guise of harmless wordplay, dealt crushing blows to the foundations of ecclesiastical and secular power. Erasmus of Rotterdam was the greatest humanist of his time, a man of incredible erudition and subtle mind. His reputation as a scholar and expert in ancient literature made his criticism even more painful for those he ridiculed. When such an authoritative thinker took up the pen, the result was devastating. The book is written from the perspective of Folly, who delivers a eulogy to herself. This literary device allowed the author to say the most seditious things under the guise of irony. Folly talks about how she rules the world, and the reader gradually realizes that she is describing the real state of affairs in society. The criticism of the clergy was particularly scathing. Erasmus mocked the ignorance of monks who consider themselves close to the apostles if they are as unlike them as possible. He described how clergymen argue about trifles, forgetting the main thing, how they accumulate wealth while preaching poverty. Scholastics also did not escape Erasmus's satirical arrows. He mocked their fruitless disputes about whether God can take the form of a woman, a devil, a donkey, a pumpkin, or a stone. Such criticism undermined the authority of university science and showed the absurdity of many theological discussions. Erasmus was no less harsh in his criticism of superstition and popular religious practices. He mocked the worship of relics, the sale of indulgences, and belief in miracles. He pointed out the foolishness of boasting about how easy it was to deceive the simple people by selling them false promises of salvation. Secular authorities also came under the satirist's fire. Erasmus showed how rulers surround themselves with flatterers and live in a world of illusions. He criticized wars waged for empty ambitions and described how folly inspires people to commit the most reckless acts. His criticism of the papacy was particularly dangerous. Erasmus had folly boast about her influence over the Roman pontiffs. He described the papal curia as a hotbed of corruption and intrigue, where all Christian virtues had been forgotten. The book instantly became popular throughout Europe. In the first few years, numerous translations into various languages were published. Readers found in The Praise of Folly a reflection of their own observations and doubts about ecclesiastical and secular authority. The Church's reaction was predictably negative. Many theologians condemned the book as blasphemous and dangerous to the faith. The Sorbonne tried to ban its distribution in France. However, the popularity of the work and Erasmus's high authority made direct persecution difficult. The influence of Praise of Folly on his contemporaries was enormous. The book shaped a critical attitude toward authority and encouraged doubt about official doctrines. Many future reformers acknowledged that it was this book that opened their eyes to the shortcomings of the Church. Martin Luther, although he disagreed with Erasmus on many issues, recognized the value of his criticism of the Catholic Church. The Praise of Folly paved the way for the Reformation by exposing the absurdity of many church practices and dogmas. Interestingly, Erasmus himself did not seek to divide the Church. He hoped for internal reforms and a return to the original Christian principles. However, his satire was so devastating that it contributed to undermining the authority of the Church and hastened the beginning of the Reformation. In Praise of Folly remains relevant today. Erasmus created a universal satire on human vices and the abuse of power. His method of ironic criticism became a model for many generations of writers and thinkers who fought against tyranny and ignorance. The Renaissance gave rise to revolutionary literature on the structure of the state, which questioned the foundations of the medieval order. These treatises proposed new models of power based on reason rather than divine right. Kings and popes understood that such books posed a mortal threat to their rule. One of the most influential was Jean Bodin's treatise 6 Books on the Commonwealth, published in 1576. Bodin developed a theory of sovereignty that revolutionized the understanding of state power. He argued that sovereignty is indivisible and belongs to those who have the right to make laws. Bode's concept was dangerous because it placed state power above ecclesiastical power. According to his theory, the ruler is accountable to no one but God and has the right to change laws at his discretion. This undermined the papacy's claim to supremacy over secular monarchs. The French philosopher also developed a climatic theory of society, arguing that the form of government depends on geographical and climatic conditions. This idea contradicted the Church's teaching of a single divine order and implied the relativity of political institutions. Althusius's work, Politics, published in 1503, was no less dangerous. Johannes Althusius developed ideas of federalism and popular sovereignty that threatened the foundations of absolute monarchy. He argued that the state arises from the bottom up, through the union of families, corporations, and communities. Althusius's theory of the social contract assumed that the people could terminate their agreement with the ruler if he violated his obligations. This idea was revolutionary at a time when royal power was considered divine and inviolable. The works of monarchomacs, authors who justified tyrannicide, were particularly dangerous. Jean Boucher's book, On the Right of Magistrates, argued that the people had the right to overthrow tyrants. Such ideas directly threatened the lives of European monarchs. François Hautman, in his treatise Franco-Gallia, argued that royal power in France was originally elective, not hereditary. He argued that the Estates General had the right to depose unworthy kings. This book was banned in France under penalty of death. Philippe de Morne developed a theory of resistance to tyranny in his work Defense Against Tyrants. He argued that there were two contracts, one between God, the people, and the king, and one between the king and the people. Violation of either contract gave the people the right to revolt. These books were widely distributed despite the bans. They were translated into various languages and secretly distributed throughout Europe. The ideas they contained inspired various liberation movements. Such works became particularly dangerous during political crises. In France, during the religious wars, the books of the monarchomacs served as ideological justification for attempts on the lives of kings. Henry III and Henry IV fell victim to fanatics inspired by these theories. The Church also came under fire from political theorists. Marsilius of Padua and other humanists questioned the right of the Church to interfere in state affairs. They revived ancient ideas about civil religion and the subordination of the clergy to secular authority. The development of printing made it impossible to effectively control the spread of political literature. Kings could burn books in public squares, but they could not destroy the ideas that had already penetrated the minds of educated people. The influence of these treatises spread far beyond the 16th and 17th centuries. The ideas of popular sovereignty, the social contract, and the right to resist tyranny became the basis of Enlightenment political philosophy. Locke, Rousseau, and other thinkers developed concepts laid out in the banned books of the Renaissance. Paradoxically, many of these dangerous books were written by people who served kings and did not seek revolution. However, the logic of their theories inevitably led to democratic conclusions that ultimately destroyed the old order. In 1513, the Florentine diplomat Niccolò Machiavelli wrote a book that forever changed the way people thought about politics and power. The Prince became the most scandalous political treatise in European history, a book that was simultaneously studied and cursed, secretly read, and publicly burned. Machiavelli wrote his work during a period of political chaos in Italy. The peninsula was fragmented into many warring states that were constantly fighting each other and subject to foreign invasions. In these conditions, traditional ideas about Christian morality and politics seemed naive and useless. The main revolutionary aspect of The Prince was the complete separation of politics and morality. Machiavelli argued that a ruler should be guided solely by considerations of effectiveness, not religious or ethical principles. This idea shocked his contemporaries, who had been raised on Christian virtues. The famous principle that the end justifies the means became a symbol of Machiavellianism. The author argued that a ruler could use any means necessary to preserve the state: deception, betrayal, cruelty. Only the result mattered: the stability and security of the state. Contemporary readers were particularly shocked by the chapters on the necessity of cruelty. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to inspire fear than love, since fear is more reliable and does not depend on the whims of subjects. He cited examples of successful tyrants who achieved their goals through ruthless methods. The concept of the lion and the fox became another scandalous element of the book. Machiavelli argued that the ideal ruler should combine the strength of a lion with the cunning of a fox. He must be prepared for both open struggle and secret intrigues and deception. Religion, in Machiavelli's concept, became merely a tool of control. He wrote that a ruler could be an unbeliever, but must appear religious, as this helps to control the people. Such cynicism was unacceptable to the church and pious rulers. Machiavelli also debunked romantic notions of war. He showed that military conflicts are a cruel necessity, not an arena for demonstrating chivalrous virtues. A ruler must be prepared to resort to any despicable means if it helps him achieve victory. The book contained a wealth of specific advice on how to govern a state. Machiavelli recommended not trusting mercenaries, relying on one's own army, destroying potential rivals, and constantly strengthening one's power. This advice was based on a sober analysis of political reality. The Prince was written as a practical guide for Lorenzo de' Medici, but its significance went far beyond Florence. The book offered a new model of political behavior based on rational calculation rather than traditional virtues. The Church immediately condemned The Prince as an immoral work. In 1559, the book was included in the Index of Prohibited Books. Catholic theologians accused Machiavelli of teaching rulers to be tyrants and atheists. Protestants were also critical of Machiavellianism. They saw it as a threat to Christian morality and accused the author of atheism. However, many Protestant rulers secretly studied The Prince and applied its recommendations in practice. Despite official bans, the book was widely distributed throughout Europe. Rulers of various countries secretly studied the Florentines' work, finding practical advice on statecraft in it. The Prince became a bedside book for many monarchs. Machiavelli's influence on political thought was enormous. He became the founder of political science as an independent discipline, separate from ethics and theology. His realistic approach to the analysis of power inspired many generations of political thinkers. Paradoxically, a book written to strengthen monarchical power ultimately contributed to its demystification. Machiavelli showed that kings are ordinary people who use cunning and force to achieve their goals. This undermined the idea of the divine nature of royal power. On October 31st, 1517, German monk Martin Luther nailed a document to the doors of the Wittenberg Castle Church that shook the foundations of the Catholic world. 95 Theses against indulgences became the first act of the Reformation, a religious revolution that split Christian Europe in two. Luther did not plan a revolution. He merely wanted to start an academic discussion about abuses in the Church. However, his theses were translated from Latin into German and, thanks to the printing press, spread throughout Germany in a matter of weeks. What was intended as a university debate turned into a mass movement. Luther was particularly outraged by the sale of indulgences, the remission of sins for money. The Dominican monk Johann Tetzel traveled throughout Germany with a cynical appeal. As soon as the coin clinks in the box, the soul ascends from purgatory to heaven. This transformation of salvation into a commercial transaction seemed blasphemous to Luther. In 1510, Luther published 3 revolutionary treatises that became the manifestos of the Reformation. To the Christian nobility of the German nation, called on secular rulers to carry out church reform on their own, without waiting for permission from Rome. On the Babylonian captivity of the Church was even more radical. Luther rejected 5 of the 7 Catholic sacraments, leaving only baptism and communion. He argued that the priesthood of all believers made a special caste of clergy unnecessary. Every Christian became a priest before God. The 3rd treatise, On the Freedom of a Christian, formulated the basic principles of Protestant theology. Luther proclaimed that salvation is achieved only through faith, not good deeds. This undermined the entire system of Catholic indulgences, pilgrimages, and donations. Particularly dangerous was the idea of sola scriptura, Scripture alone. Luther asserted that the Bible was the only source of religious truth, and that church tradition and papal decrees had no divine authority. This deprived the church hierarchy of its monopoly on the interpretation of faith. The translation of the Bible into German was a revolutionary act. Luther believed that every Christian should be able to read the Holy Scriptures in their native language. His German Bible not only democratized religion, but also contributed to the development of the German literary language. Pope Leo X initially did not take Luther seriously, calling the conflict a monastic squabble. However, the reformer's popularity grew with each passing day. In 1520, the bull Exsurge Domine was issued, threatening Luther with excommunication if he did not renounce his views. Luther publicly burned the papal bull, which became a symbolic break with Rome. In 1521, at the Diet of Worms, he refused to renounce his writings, uttering the famous words, "Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. God help me." Emperor Charles V declared Luther an outlaw by the Edict of Worms. All his writings were to be burned, and anyone who sheltered the reformer would be put to death. However, the Saxon elector Frederick the Wise hid Luther in Wartburg Castle, where he continued to write. Luther's ideas quickly spread throughout Germany and beyond. In Switzerland, they were taken up by John Calvin, who created an even more radical version of Protestantism. In England, King Henry VIII used Lutheran ideas to justify his break with Rome. The printing press played a key role in spreading Protestant ideas. Luther's writings were printed in thousands of copies and secretly distributed throughout Europe. The Catholic Church was unable to effectively control this flood of information. The social consequences of the Reformation were enormous. The Protestant work ethic contributed to the development of capitalism. The idea of the priesthood of all believers supported democratic tendencies. The translation of the Bible into national languages strengthened national identity. The Catholic Church responded to the challenge with the Counter-Reformation. The Council of Trent condemned Protestant teachings and tightened church discipline. The Inquisition intensified the persecution of heretics. However, the schism in the Christian world became irreversible. The religious wars of the 16th and 17th centuries were the bloody consequence of the Reformation. Europe was plunged into chaos and mutual destruction, which ended only with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648. The principle of whose power, his faith, cemented the religious division of Europe. In the 17th century, the scientific revolution changed the very nature of human thought. One of the main heroes of this era was Galileo Galilei, an Italian physicist, astronomer, and philosopher who challenged the Catholic Church itself. His books and treatises were banned, and he was put on trial for ideas that could shake the foundations of the religious worldview. Galileo was born in Pisa in 1544 and educated in Florence. Even in his youth, he showed a remarkable aptitude for experimental science, which set him apart from traditional scholastics who relied on authority. His work in physics and mechanics made him famous throughout Italy. However, it was his research into celestial bodies that brought Galileo both fame and misfortune. Using an improved telescope of his own design, the scientist observed Jupiter's moons, sunspots, and the phases of Venus. These discoveries directly contradicted Ptolemy's geocentric system, which had dominated European science since ancient times. In 1610, Galileo published a book entitled Sidereus Nuncius, Starry Messenger, in which he described his discoveries. The book caused a sensation among scientists and deep outrage among church authorities. The discovery of Jupiter's moons showed that not all celestial bodies revolve around the Earth, and the phases of Venus refuted key dogmas of geocentrism. Galileo's support for Nicholas Copernicus's heliocentric system proved particularly dangerous. The Italian claimed that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and not vice versa, which contradicted biblical texts and church teachings. This idea seemed so seditious that its discussion was banned by official decree in 1616. Galileo did not back down. In 1632, he published his magnum opus, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. The book was written in the form of a conversation between supporters of geocentrism and heliocentrism, and it clearly sympathized with Copernicus's theories. The Church took this as a challenge and immediately banned the book. In 1633, Galileo was summoned to Rome to stand trial before the Holy Inquisition. The scientist faced the death penalty, but thanks to the support of influential friends, his life was spared. Galileo was forced to publicly renounce his ideas, but according to legend, after his renunciation, he whispered, "And yet it moves." This was followed by a period of severe censorship. All of Galileo's works were added to the index of prohibited books. Printing and distributing his writings was strictly forbidden. Scientific books that mentioned his discoveries were subject to strict editing. Despite the persecution, Galileo's ideas spread throughout Europe. Secret copies of his works were copied by hand, and scientists in Protestant countries continued to study his scientific findings. The Italian thinker became a symbol of the struggle for freedom of scientific inquiry against dogmatism and censorship. The influence of Galileo's works went far beyond astronomy. His method of experimentation and observation became the basis of modern science. His confrontation with the Church demonstrated the importance of independent thinking, truth, and criticism of authority. The scientific revolution that began with Galileo's ideas ultimately undermined the Church's monopoly on truth. The books banned by the Catholic authorities opened new horizons for the human mind and became the foundation for further scientific discoveries and progress. In 1651, the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes published the book Leviathan, which became one of the most controversial political treatises of the 17th century. This work not only threatened the religious and monarchical foundations of English society, but also proposed a completely new model of the state based on rationalism and individual fear. Hobbes lived during the English Revolution, when the traditional power of monarchs and the church was seriously shaken. He witnessed civil wars, the execution of King Charles I, and the establishment of a republic. These upheavals prompted the philosopher to search for a theoretical basis for a stable state. Leviathan begins with a description of human nature. Hobbes argues that people's natural inclinations give rise to competition, distrust, and violence. In the state of nature, when there is no state authority, man is a wolf to man. The only way to avoid eternal war is to submit to a strong ruler who will guarantee security and order. Particularly revolutionary was his thesis on the origin of power. Hobbes argues that power does not come from God, but from a contract between individuals. People voluntarily transfer their rights to a sovereign, creating an artificial leviathan, a state with absolute power. The book questioned the divine right of monarchs, which had underpinned European politics for centuries. For Hobbes, the king was merely a sovereign chosen by rational agreement, not by the will of heaven. This undermined the foundations of the feudal order and church ideology. Religion was particularly criticized. Hobbes considered religious harmony necessary for order, but did not trust the authority of the church. He argued that the state should control the church to prevent religious wars and schisms. Such secularism angered the clergy and conservatives. Hobbes analyzed in detail the sources of civil conflicts arising from religious and political differences. He proposed absolute sovereign power as the only way to suppress anarchy. This contradicted the ideas of limited monarchy and separation of powers that were gaining popularity in Europe. Leviathan was immediately added to the list of banned books in Catholic countries. In England, the work was met with a storm of criticism, especially from Protestant theologians and royalists. Hobbes was accused of atheism, materialism, and subversive activities. The work was distributed secretly, through handwritten copies and illegal publications. Many politicians and thinkers, despite the bans, studied Hobbes's views in an attempt to understand the mechanisms of power and the causes of social conflict. His ideas became particularly important for supporters of strong central authority. The influence of Leviathan on political thought proved fundamental. John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and other philosophers built their theories of the social contract on the basis of Hobbes's chapter. Many elements of modern political science, state theory, and law can be traced back to this banned 17th century book. Paradoxically, Leviathan both strengthened and undermined the monarchy. The author justified absolute power as a means of suppressing chaos, but destroyed the divine right of kings, turning the monarch into a technical administrator of the state. In the 18th century, Europe underwent an intellectual revolution that forever changed attitudes toward power, religion, and law. The philosophy of the Enlightenment became the main enemy of the traditional order, and its books were censored, burned, and persecuted by monarchs and the clergy. The Enlightenment thinkers asserted the right to freedom of thought, religion, and scientific inquiry. The works of Voltaire, Diderot, Helvetius, Montesquieu, and Rousseau criticized absolutism, religious intolerance, and social hierarchy. All these ideas were deadly dangerous to the old regime. One of the most scandalous works was Voltaire's Philosophical Dictionary. In short articles, the author exposed the superstitions, fanaticism, cruelty, and hypocrisy of the authorities. Voltaire mocked dogmas and called for tolerance and rational thinking. Diderot and D'Alembert's Encyclopedia was a grandiose project that brought together the best thinkers in France. This work systematized knowledge that was inaccessible to the common man. The encyclopedia criticized the Church and established a new scientific and moral paradigm. Diderot was especially dangerous to the authorities because of his belief in materialism. He argued that everything that exists is the result of the development of matter, not divine intervention. Diderot's works were banned, and he was arrested several times. Montesquieu, in The Spirit of Laws, laid the foundations for the separation of powers, which led to the destruction of absolute monarchy. This doctrine became the theoretical foundation for future democratic revolutions and constitutional states. Helvetius, in Discourse on the Mind, defended freedom of opinion and individual rights. His books were burned in public, and the author himself was persecuted at all levels. Even moderate criticism of the authorities or religion was grounds for persecution. Rousseau, in Emile and other works, criticized the state education system and promoted personal freedom, free thought, and equality. His books were banned, and the thinker himself was expelled from France for anarchism. Banned works of the Enlightenment were distributed underground throughout Europe. Copied by hand and passed from person to person, they became catalysts for social change. People who read these books began to doubt the justice of the existing order and sought new forms of social organization. Monarchs and the Church tried to combat this intellectual contagion. Special censorship departments were opened, books were burned, and authors were arrested and expelled from their countries. Nevertheless, the ideas of the Enlightenment penetrated all strata of society, from universities to enlightened circles of craftsmen. Ultimately, the philosophy of the Enlightenment paved the way for the revolutions of the 18th century. The books that were banned and burned inspired people to fight for freedom, equality, and brotherhood. Their ideas became the foundation of the modern world, and the struggle for the right to think and read is one of the greatest achievements of human civilization. In 1762, a book appeared in Amsterdam that stirred up the whole of enlightened Europe. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract. This work became a sign of future revolutions, banned by the Bible for all supporters of freedom, equality, and popular sovereignty. Rousseau began as an ordinary craftsman, but his talents led him to the intellectual heights of France. In The Social Contract, he formulated the main ideas of democracy: the sovereignty of the people, the equality of all citizens, and the right to resist tyranny. The book begins with the famous phrase, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." Rousseau criticizes all forms of institutional violence, monarchy, aristocracy, and the Church. He argues that only a free agreement between equal individuals can create a just society. The idea of the general will was particularly dangerous for those in power. Rousseau argued that the law should express the will of the people, not the interests of private groups. This rejected the foundations of absolutism and the monopoly of the Church. The author analyzed the mechanisms of the social contract in detail. He denied the right to inherit power and called for the constant renewal of civil consent. All laws must be passed by a majority, and rulers must be elected democratically. The social contract contained theses on the importance of public debate, transparency of power, and the personal responsibility of every citizen. Rousseau criticized all forms of secret political activity and advocated openness. The book caused a storm of indignation among the monarchs and clergy of Europe. In France, the work was immediately banned, and Rousseau was forced to flee to Switzerland, then to England. Throughout Europe, the author's followers were persecuted and arrested. Rousseau's ideas became the ideological basis of the Great French Revolution. The social contract was quoted by revolutionary leaders, supporters of constitutional reform, and future authors of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The book's influence spread to all continents. In America, its ideas formed the basis of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. In Russia, Rousseau's work was read secretly in circles of future Decembrists. In Poland and Germany, the book inspired movements for national independence. At the same time, Rousseau was subjected to fierce attacks from conservatives. He was accused of social anarchism, godlessness, hatred of the institution of the family, and subversive activities. However, neither bans nor censorship could stop the spread of the precepts of freedom. The banned book changed political philosophy forever. The social contract became the benchmark for all subsequent discussions about power, law, and justice. Rousseau's ideas live on in modern democratic systems and remind us of the supreme value of human freedom. By the end of the 18th century, Europe was swept by a wave of revolutionary pamphlets and brochures, which became the last straw for the monarchs and aristocrats. These small printed publications proved to be no less dangerous than fundamental philosophical works, as they were accessible to the common people and called for immediate action. The French Revolution spawned an unprecedented amount of political literature. Thousands of pamphlets were distributed on the streets of Paris, calling for the overthrow of the king, the destruction of the aristocracy, and the establishment of a republic. These texts were written in simple language and were understandable to every literate person. One of the most famous was the pamphlet by Abbé Emmanuel Sieyès, "What is the Third Estate?" In this short pamphlet, the author argued that the Third Estate, peasants, artisans, and the bourgeoisie, formed the basis of the nation, while the nobility and clergy were parasites. The pamphlet spread instantly throughout France. Jean-Paul Marat's Friend of the People became the most radical revolutionary publication. Marat called for the merciless punishment of the enemies of the people, demanded the confiscation of aristocratic property, and the establishment of a dictatorship of the plebs. His newspaper was banned several times, but continued to be published underground. Pamphlets exposing the private life of the royal family were particularly popular. The secret memoirs of the court and similar publications portrayed Marie Antoinette as a promiscuous foreigner and Louis XVI as a weak ruler. These publications undermined the prestige of the monarchy in the eyes of the people. Revolutionary pamphlets quickly spread beyond France. In England, radicals published brochures calling for democratic reforms. Thomas Paine, in his pamphlet Common Sense, argued that monarchy was absurd and called on Americans to fight for independence. Paine's Rights of Man became a revolutionary manifesto for all of Europe. The author defended the principles of the French Revolution and criticized Edmund Burke, who condemned the events in Paris. The book was banned in England, and Paine was forced to flee to France. Pamphlets appeared in Germany calling for the unification of the German lands and the overthrow of the princes. Gotthold Lessing and other authors criticized feudal fragmentation and demanded national unity. These ideas formed the basis of future liberation movements. The revolutionary press used new methods to influence the masses. Pamphlets were accompanied by caricatures mocking kings and aristocrats. Ordinary people who could not read understood the meaning of the images and passed on their content by word of mouth. The authorities tried to combat revolutionary literature by all means available. Printing houses were closed, authors were arrested, and copies were burned in public squares. However, the printing press made it impossible to completely control information. Dozens of new publications immediately appeared to replace each one that was closed. Pamphlets translated into national languages were particularly dangerous. The ideas of freedom and equality spread among the Poles, Italians, Germans, and Spaniards. European monarchs understood that the revolutionary contagion could spread to their possessions. The Napoleonic Wars contributed to the further spread of revolutionary ideas. French soldiers carried pamphlets and proclamations calling on the peoples to liberate themselves from tyranny. Even after Napoleon's defeat, these ideas continued to live on. Revolutionary pamphlets laid the foundations of modern political journalism. They demonstrated the power of the printed word in mobilizing the masses and shaping public opinion. The tradition of revolutionary journalism was continued by the socialists and anarchists of the 19th century. The influence of these small books was enormous. They not only paved the way for revolutionary events, but also changed the very nature of political struggle. From then on, ideas became the main weapon in the struggle for power, and their dissemination became the most important task of any political movement. In 1559, Pope Paul IV established the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, an official catalog of books banned from reading by Catholics under threat of excommunication. This document became the most comprehensive and systematic list of banned literature in human history, lasting more than 4 centuries. The idea of centralized control over books arose as a response to the spread of Protestantism and the development of printing. The Church realized that it could no longer control each manuscript individually. A unified censorship mechanism was needed to protect the Catholic faith from heretical ideas. The first index contained about 1,000 titles, but with each new edition, the list grew. By the end of its existence, it contained more than 4,000 banned works. The list included not only religious treatises, but also scientific works, philosophical writings, and fiction. A special category was made up of first-class books, works by authors whose entire oeuvre was automatically banned. This list included John Wycliffe, Jan Hus, Martin Luther, John Calvin, and other heretics. Even the most innocuous texts by these authors were considered dangerous to the faith. The index included works by some of humanity's greatest thinkers. It contained Machiavelli's The Prince, the works of Galileo, the writings of Descartes, Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and novels by Balzac and Hugo. The Church feared any ideas that could undermine its authority. Scientific discoveries were particularly frightening to Church censors. The works of Copernicus, Kepler, Newton, and Darwin were included in the index. The Church stubbornly defended the geocentric view of the world and the biblical version of creation, rejecting any contradictory data. The procedure for adding a book to the index was complex and bureaucratic. The work was first examined by the local inquisition. Then the case was sent to Rome. The congregation of the index consisted of cardinals and theologians who made the final decision on the ban. Authors of banned books could appeal and correct erroneous passages in their works. Some agreed to make changes in order to have the ban lifted. Galileo, for example, tried to negotiate a compromise version of his works with the Church, but to no avail. Violation of the ban was punishable by excommunication from the Church, the most severe punishment in the Catholic world. This meant not only spiritual death, but also social isolation. Those who were excommunicated could not hold public office, engage in trade, or receive inheritance. However, the effectiveness of the index was limited. In Protestant countries, it was not recognized at all. Even in Catholic states, books were secretly distributed among the educated classes of society. The forbidden fruit proved to be especially sweet. The Enlightenment dealt a serious blow to the system of church censorship. Philosophers openly criticized the index as an obstacle to the development of the human mind. Voltaire sarcastically remarked that the index was the best advertisement for good books. The French Revolution demonstrated the powerlessness of church censorship in the face of mass political movements. Revolutionary pamphlets spread faster than the censors could ban them. The old system of information control collapsed forever. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the index became increasingly anachronistic. The secularization of society, the development of science, and democratic freedoms rendered church censorship ineffective. Attempts to ban Darwin or Marx seemed ridiculous. Finally, in 1966, Pope Paul VI abolished the Index of Prohibited Books. The Second Vatican Council recognized that the days of total censorship were over. The Church retained the right to warn believers about dangerous books, but no longer claimed total control. The history of the Index is a history of the struggle between authority and freedom of thought. Paradoxically, this catalog of banned books became the best guide to the greatest works of human genius. Many books included in the Index are now considered classics of world literature and science. The history of banned books is the history of human progress. Every page burned, every author persecuted, every idea banned ultimately contributed to humanity's movement toward freedom, knowledge, and justice. What seemed seditious and dangerous yesterday has become the foundation of our civilization today. Modern democracy is unthinkable without ideas that were once considered heretical. The principles of popular sovereignty, separation of powers, and human rights were first formulated in books that were burned in public squares and whose authors were persecuted by the Inquisition. The scientific revolution also began with banned books. Copernicus's heliocentric system, Galileo's laws, Darwin's theory of evolution, all these discoveries were initially met with fierce resistance from religious and secular authorities. However, truth ultimately prevailed. Freedom of speech and of the press, which we take for granted today, was won at the cost of the lives and suffering of many generations of thinkers and writers. Every banned book became another argument in favor of the human right to freedom of expression. Paradoxically, the system of prohibitions itself contributed to the spread of dangerous ideas. Forbidden fruit always seems especially appealing. People were willing to risk their lives to read a banned book precisely because it was banned. The development of printing made effective control over information impossible. Attempts by the authorities to stop the spread of ideas only accelerated their circulation. A single copy of a banned book spawned dozens of secret copies. Banned books formed a special culture of intellectual resistance. Underground libraries, secret printing houses, and literature distribution networks all created an alternative system of education and enlightenment that was beyond the control of the authorities. Many banned books were centuries ahead of their time. Ideas that seemed utopian in the 16th century became reality in the 18th or 19th. History shows that the human mind inevitably moves toward truth, despite all obstacles. The influence of banned books spread far beyond Europe. Colonization and trade spread dangerous ideas around the world. The principles of freedom and equality formulated by European thinkers inspired liberation movements in America, Asia, and Africa. Today, in the age of the internet and global communication, the physical destruction of books has become virtually impossible. However, attempts to control information continue in new forms. Digital censorship, website blocking, and the persecution of bloggers are all modern versions of the old struggle against freedom of thought. The history of banned books teaches us to value intellectual freedom and defend it from any encroachment. It shows that human progress is impossible without the right to make mistakes, to doubt, and to criticize existing authorities. The great books of the past, which were once banned, now stand on the shelves of our libraries as monuments to human courage and the pursuit of truth. They remind us that freedom of thought is not a gift from those in power, but a conquest of the people. Every time we open a book and read freely, we exercise a right for which thousands of thinkers, writers, and ordinary readers paid with their lives. Their sacrifice was not in vain. It gave us a world in which ideas can compete openly and truth can prevail without fear of the Inquisition's stake. The legacy of forbidden knowledge lives on in every democratic constitution, in every scientific discovery, in every work of art created by a free spirit. This legacy reminds us that the human mind is stronger than any prohibition, and that truth will always find its way to the people.